Tories capitalise on Labour's U-turn on their flagship green policy? We've been talking about this for ages, haven't we? So Keir Starmer has insisted Labour is being straight with voters. The decision to ditch the pledge to spend £28 billion a year on green project has been criticised by many Labour MPs as well as environmental groups and trade unions. Joining me now is GBNews senior political commentator Nigel Nelson to explain what is going on with this policy that I feel like, Nigel, we have been talking about nearly as long as Brexit. Good afternoon, Nigel.
Yeah, it's been going on for ages that we've been expecting Keir Starmer to actually ditch it, and this week he did. I find that deeply disappointing. I think that he's fallen into a Tory trap that was laid for him, and he needn't have done it. Now he's got to explain how he can actually achieve economic growth now that the key policy that he had to do it has been abandoned.
It just sounds like yet another flip-flop, Nigel, what we're expecting from, the Labour Party and Keir in particular. And this is a policy that was devised by Ed Miliband and backed by Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. I mean, is this just demonstrating more division in the Labour Party?
Well, I don't suppose it's more division. I think that the problem was that first of all, they had to water the policy down. The original idea had been £28 billion being invested from year one of a Labour government. That was then had to be watered down because interest rates rose. You can understand that. Now they've abandoned it altogether. And as I say, I find that deeply disappointing, not least because of the economic benefits it would have had, that the kind of global direction of travel is for green industries. If we invest in that in this country, we could have led the way there. And it was predicted you could get £1 trillion of trade based on this had the policy gone ahead.
But, I mean, is it what voters are worried about at the moment? How is it going to affect the pound in their pocket? I think that is one of the reasons behind it, isn't it? I mean, it's like, we can't afford to pay our heating bills as it is. It didn't sound like much of a vote winner with the older Labour voters. The youngsters, yeah, maybe, but what about that older, that mid-market that he needs to go for?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And what the Tories tried to do was to say that if this policy went ahead, the money would come from tax rises. It wouldn't. The money would have come from borrowing. So tax wouldn't have risen. Now, clearly, that if interest rates are as high as they are now and carry on that way, that borrowing target becomes a real problem. That bit I get. But we are heading towards interest rates going down. Although there'll probably be an uptick in inflation this week on Wednesday when the figures are announced, the chances are we will get back to the inflation target of 2%. That means interest rates coming down. Good news for all of us. Our mortgages will then be cheaper and so on. Also, it makes borrowing much easier. So Labour never really had to ditch this policy. If it turned out they couldn't actually adopt it at the time because of high interest rates, that was the point to say, sorry, we can't do it yet. They just didn't have to do it now. And that was the Tory trap that was laid.
Which they've fallen into. I mean, Labour have a 24-point lead in the polls. I mean, in theory, it's almost an impossible comeback for Sunak. I mean, it's been the biggest comeback in 70 years. Can he capitalise on this, though, Nigel?
Well, the way he's trying to capitalise it, and this is how the trap was laid, is to argue that he's got a plan and Labour hasn't. So you start off with the accusation of tax rises, untrue. Now that's been dropped. He can't actually attack Labour for going to raise taxes. Now he's saying that Labour don't have any plan for the economy. And that was the problem for Keir Starmer. Until he can explain how he's going to fill this gap that he's created for himself, he doesn't have a plan for the economy.
OK, talking of tax, you brought this thorny subject up this week. Rishi Sunak's tax return has been published. It does sound like he pays rather a lot, doesn't it?
It does rather, but then he's a very rich man. That you're talking about sort of a family wealth of 700 million, thanks to his wife's investments in her father's IT company in India. So yes, he is paying a lot of tax, and so he should, because he's getting a lot of money in. And obviously that will be a subject for the Labour attack, which will argue that he's so rich that he's out of touch with ordinary people.
And I'm asking everyone who's coming on the show this afternoon, Nigel, one non-policy story you would like to ask Rishi Sunak at the great, we've got him on the programme on Monday night, haven't we? What's the one question you would ask him, not policy related?
OK, what I'd like to ask him is what he intends to do with his life after he loses the election.
Oh, and do you have any suggestions quickly?
I don't think he'd answer that question for a start. I imagine he will disappear to California and Silicon Valley.
Right, OK. Silicon Valley, that's not a euphemism, is it, Nigel? No, be careful. That's Nigel Nelson, our political correspondent there. Thank you so much, Nigel, for joining us this afternoon.